The mechanic worked in solitude, surrounded by the hum of machines and the hiss of welding torches. This corner of the galaxy bustled with alien life, yet he preferred the company of his tools and half-repaired gadgets. Humans were rare here, seen as unremarkable by the galaxy's diverse denizens, but his skill with machinery had earned him a reputation. He didn't mind the anonymity. Fixing things was simpler than dealing with people, or aliens. On an otherwise unremarkable day, the shop door slid open, and a towering reptilian figure stepped inside. Its scaled face glistened under the dim lights, and it carried a metallic container roughly the size of a coffin. "You fix anything," it hissed in heavily accented galactic common. "Fix this." The mechanic inspected the container. Its surface was etched with runes unfamiliar even to him, and faint energy pulses coursed through its seams. It wasn't just a containment unit, it was a prison. Through a narrow viewing slit, two golden eyes glared back at him, filled with a mix of fury and desperation. A low growl emanated from inside, vibrating the air like a subsonic threat. "What's inside?" the mechanic asked cautiously, his hands already tracing the mechanisms. "Not your concern," the alien snapped. "It's dangerous. That's all you need to know." He considered refusing, but the payment offered was hefty, and the alien wasn't the type to take no for an answer. Still, unease settled in his chest as he worked. The unit was more advanced than anything he'd seen before, designed not just to contain but to suppress. Whatever was inside had been deliberately subdued, its strength forcibly stolen. The creature within shifted, its movements sluggish yet deliberate. The mechanic paused, locking eyes with it through the slit. There was no blind rage or mindless ferocity in its gaze. Instead, it radiated intelligence, too much intelligence for him to ignore. The longer he worked, the more he noticed. Scars on the creature's body, the cruel tightness of the suppressor bands, and faint etchings on its fur resembling symbols from old Earth myths. Whispers began circulating outside the shop. Passers-by exchanged uneasy glances, some muttering about the ancient predators and their tragic downfall. The mechanic pretended not to hear, but the weight of their words pressed down on him. He worked in silence, but his mind churned. Finally, the alien returned, looming over him. "Is it done?" The mechanic hesitated. He could claim the job was impossible, but that might provoke the trader's wrath. He could fix the unit, condemning the creature to permanent captivity. Or he could do something reckless, something human. "Yeah," he said, stepping back. "It's done." The trader leaned in, inspecting the unit. A sudden hiss erupted as the suppressor bands failed. In an instant, the containment field collapsed, and the unit's door exploded outward. The predator leapt free, landing with a grace that belied its prior captivity. It turned to the mechanic, locking eyes with him, before bolting into the shadows. The trader roared in fury, but the mechanic didn't flinch. For the first time in years, he felt like he'd done something that mattered. The facility was dark, the only light coming from flickering overhead panels. Kaer'ith moved silently, its golden eyes scanning every shadow. The mechanic followed, his plasma cutter in hand, gripping it tighter with each distant sound of approaching boots. His heart raced, but there was no time to dwell on fear. Kaer'ith suddenly froze, its ears flattening. Through their strange mental connection, the mechanic felt the warning before it was spoken. "Close." 6 pursuers. "Well, He nodded silently, understanding the stakes. The predator turned, leading him deeper into the labyrinth of corridors. They passed abandoned equipment, forgotten by time, and the mechanic's mind began to work. Machines were his domain, and even outdated systems could be useful. He stopped, examining a half-functional drone unit gathering dust in a corner. "What are you doing?" Kaer'ith asked through the connection, its tone sharp. "Even the odds," he replied, already prying open the drone's casing. With practiced hands, he rewired its internal systems, bypassing rusted components and rerouting power to its weapons. The drone sputtered to life, its targeting lasers flickering uncertainly. The first mercenary appeared around the corner, weapon raised. Before the mechanic could react, Kaer'ith lunged. It moved like lightning, a blur of fur and claws that knocked the attacker to the ground. The mercenary barely had time to scream before the predator silenced him. More footsteps echoed, closer now. The mechanic activated the drone, sending it forward. Its erratic movements made it a poor fighter, but its weapon systems were still functional. A burst of plasma fire lit up the corridor, forcing the remaining mercenaries to take cover. Kaer'ith used the distraction to strike again. It was a predator in its element, tearing through the enemy with precision and ferocity. The mechanic could feel its focus through their bond, a relentless determination that drove it forward. Move! Kaer'ith's thought cut through the chaos. The mechanic darted past the skirmish, his mind racing. They needed more than just a temporary escape, they needed an edge. He spotted a power junction ahead, its exposed circuits sparking faintly. With Kaer'ith holding off the remaining mercenaries, he worked quickly, rerouting the junction's power. Sparks flew as he overloaded the system, sending a surge through the facility's aging electrical grid. Lights flickered and died, plunging the corridors into darkness. Kaer'ith returned to his side, blood streaking its fur. "They'll regroup," it warned. "Not if we get out first," he replied, leading the way toward an emergency exit. As they ran, the connection between them grew stronger. Kaer'ith's thoughts were clearer now, its emotions bleeding into his own. Beneath the predator's stoic exterior, he sensed pain, years of captivity and abuse, and a deep, unyielding will to survive. They emerged into the open air, the city stretching out before them. For a moment, they paused, catching their breath. Kaer'ith looked at him, its golden eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "You risked everything," it said. "So did you," the mechanic replied. Kaer'ith tilted its head, a silent acknowledgment passing between them. For the first time, they weren't just allies of circumstance, they were partners in survival. The escape led them far from the city, into a desolate stretch of rocky terrain where the stars seemed brighter against the deep black of the sky. The mechanic stumbled over the uneven ground, exhaustion settling into his bones. Kaer'ith, despite its injuries, moved with steady determination, its gaze fixed on something unseen. "Where are we even going?" the mechanic asked, his voice breaking the silence. Kaer'ith paused, turning to face him. "Not far now. A place of old power. A place they fear." He didn't question further, too drained to argue, and followed as the predator continued its path. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a towering stone structure, half buried in the ground. It was ancient, its surface carved with symbols similar to the ones on Kaer'ith's fur. The air around it was heavy, charged with an energy that made the mechanic's skin prickle. "What is this place?" he asked, stepping hesitantly toward the entrance. Kaer'ith didn't answer immediately. Instead, it moved closer to the structure, its movements slow and reverent. Finally, it turned to him, its mental voice softer now. "The War Guardian rests here." The name struck something deep in the mechanic's mind, a memory of half-forgotten myths told by starfarers in dim-lit bars. The War Guardians were said to be ancient protectors, powerful entities that had once maintained peace across the galaxy before vanishing into legend. "You're saying, it's real?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes," Kaer'ith replied. "And it must awaken." The mechanic approached cautiously, his hand brushing the cold stone of the entrance. As he stepped inside, the dim light from outside faded, replaced by a faint, pulsing glow emanating from the walls. The air was thick with an almost tangible sense of purpose, as if the very structure were alive. At the heart of the chamber, a massive figure loomed, a mechanical colossus, its form both graceful and imposing. Though dormant, its presence was overwhelming. The mechanic's breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. The War Guardian, its surface inscribed with the same ancient symbols that adorned Kaer'ith. Kaer'ith stepped forward, its voice resonating with both urgency and conviction. "It will not wake without you." "Me?" the mechanic asked, stunned. "I'm just a guy who fixes things." "I'm not a hero." Kaer'ith's gaze locked with his. "You freed me. You saw what others ignored. That is why it must be you." He hesitated, doubt swirling in his mind. But as he looked at the War Guardian, he felt something stir deep within him, a pull, like a quiet voice urging him forward. He approached the Colossus, his fingers brushing a control panel embedded in its chest. The symbols glowed brighter at his touch, and the chamber filled with a low hum. Behind them, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment. The mercenaries had found them. Kaer'ith growled, positioning itself between the mechanic and the entrance. "Hurry," it urged. The mechanic's hands moved instinctively, his skills taking over. He rewired ancient circuits, bypassing systems long dormant. With each connection, the War Guardian's form lit up, its immense power coming to life. Finally, with a deep, resonating thrum, the Colossus awoke. Its eyes, twin orbs of brilliant light, opened, and its towering form moved with a grace that defied its size. It turned to the mechanic, its voice a deep, resonant echo. "You have called me," it said. "I am the Guardian. And you are my chosen ally." The words struck like a hammer, leaving no room for doubt. The mechanic nodded, fear and awe warring within him. The War Guardian rose to its full height, its presence filling the chamber. "Let them come," it said. The chamber trembled as the War Guardian stepped forward, its massive form radiating a power that seemed to bend the air around it. Kaer'ith snarled, its golden eyes fixed on the shadowed entrance where the mercenaries would soon arrive. The mechanic stood between them, his pulse pounding as the weight of the moment settled on his shoulders. The first wave of mercenaries poured in, their weapons lighting up the dim chamber with streaks of plasma fire. The War Guardian moved instantly, raising an arm that projected a shimmering energy shield. The bolts dissolved on impact, their force reduced to harmless flickers. With a single sweep of its other arm, the Guardian unleashed a concussive wave that sent the attackers flying back. Kaer'ith leapt into action, a blur of claws and muscle. It tore through the ranks with precision, its movements calculated yet brutal. The mechanic, caught in the chaos, scrambled to stay out of the line of fire. His role wasn't to fight, at least, not in the traditional sense. His mind raced, analyzing the mercenaries' equipment, searching for weaknesses. "Disable their drones," Kaer'ith's voice cut through his thoughts, urgent but steady. The mechanic spotted the small hovering devices coordinating the mercenaries' assault. Without hesitation, he darted to a control panel on the wall, using the War Guardian's awakening energy to power up dormant systems. Sparks flew as he bypassed ancient wiring, rerouting a surge that fried the drones mid-air. They sputtered and fell, leaving the mercenaries disoriented. "Good," Kaer'ith projected, briefly glancing back at him before diving into another skirmish. More reinforcements arrived, this time carrying heavier weaponry. Explosions rocked the chamber, and the War Guardian shifted its stance, absorbing the brunt of the assault. Its voice boomed, calm yet commanding. "Focus their fire. I will hold." The mechanic hesitated, unsure how to contribute, until he spotted a stack of volatile fuel cells near the far wall. An idea struck, a reckless, desperate idea. He grabbed a loose piece of piping and used it to jury-rig a makeshift launcher, aiming the cells toward the incoming mercenaries. The explosion that followed shook the entire chamber, sending debris raining down. The mercenaries scattered, their formation broken. Kaer'ith capitalized on the chaos, its claws flashing as it took down the remaining attackers. But the traitor stepped into the chamber then, flanked by an elite squad clad in armor that seemed impervious to the Guardian's concussive waves. The traitor's voice was cold, cutting through the din. "You think this changes anything?" it sneered. "A relic and a scavenger won't stop what's coming." The mechanic's grip tightened on his plasma cutter. He wasn't a soldier, but he wasn't helpless either. He moved toward the War Guardian, his mind racing. "Guardian, can you amplify its power?" he asked, pointing to a set of ancient energy conduits running along the walls. "Yes," the Guardian replied. "But the strain may destroy this structure." "Do it," the mechanic said, his voice firm. As the War Guardian redirected its energy, the conduits glowed with blinding light. The chamber itself seemed to come alive, the symbols on the walls pulsating in rhythm with the Guardian's movements. A final surge of power erupted, engulfing the traitor and its squad in a wave of energy that disintegrated their armor and weapons, leaving them defenseless. The traitor fell to its knees, defeated but defiant. "You've won nothing," it spat. Kaer'ith approached, its golden eyes blazing. "You enslaved me. Used me. Now you will pay." The mechanic placed a hand on Kaer'ith's shoulder, shaking his head. "Enough. Let them leave. They've lost." For a tense moment, Kaer'ith hesitated, its claws twitching. Then it stepped back, its breathing heavy but controlled. The War Guardian's light dimmed as it turned to the mechanic. "The battle is over. But the war is just beginning." The mechanic nodded, exhaustion finally catching up to him. He looked at Kaer'ith, then at the Guardian. Together, they had done the impossible. As they emerged from the ruins, the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon. For the first time, the mechanic felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Kaer'ith walked beside him, its head held high, and the war guardian loomed behind them, a silent sentinel. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. They had found something stronger than fear or doubt, a purpose. And together, they would face whatever came next.